need to get that intro video edited a little bit since Jack is not actually here to present with us. But what is up, everybody? This is episode 0 of the new PH2T3R live show. We'll be doing this every Sunday evening at this time, starting now. This is just episode 0, a pilot to try to work out the kinks and get into the rhythm of things, get things going. So, what's going on, Ed? Chris, how you doing?
Doing well. How about you, Dustin?
Yeah,
excited to talk about glory.
Absolutely, I'm excited to get into it. But you have been up to some interesting stuff lately on your new vertical videos.
I have finally succumbed to the peer pressure. After many years of people telling me inside and outside of the order, Chris, you need to be doing more stuff on social media. You could be so big, you could be doing more stuff on X, which I still am holding back from because I think more than one social media platform is dangerous. But I started making reels talking about Homer and a little bit about Christianity and about some philosophy and classic stuff. The one that's really taken off is the critique of Emily Wilson, which Jack and I have discussed before a little bit. It's a pervasive nuisance in the classics world to see this sort of feminist subversion of these classical texts, which does sort of play into our theme a little bit. But I try to be positive and invite people into the good stuff as well, whether that's the Fagles and Lattimore translations of Homer. I continue to be a cheerleader and proselytizer for the wonderful work of Greg Naj, who I cannot recommend highly enough, and who was a big inspiration for me in exploring the topic we're going to be getting into here today.
Yeah, for sure. Why do you think it is that she's so pervasive in the classics? I mean, I run into something similar when I'm looking for any good sources on ancient Rome, being a major history nerd, running into Mary Beard incessantly.
Oh yes.
She just won't go away. But what is it? Was it about Emily Wilson, you think, that makes her so?
Well, most of the Emily Wilson fans on online have not read any other Homer. They just know that she is like the feminist answer to this domain. So they cheerlead her because she's, has the signals of being one of the, it's a woman who's translated this thing. Never mind Carolyn Alexander's excellent translation. Never mind the other women who participated in the classics in various ways. What you see in Emily Wilson's translation and in her lecture about her translation is a hatred of Odysseus and Telemachus in particular, which sort of resonates with the sort of person who wants to smash the patriarchy and who just looks back at the history of. But there's something kind of parasitic about this. I mean, anybody who is trying too hard to put their own spin on a translation is probably doing something parasitic. The ideal of a good translation should be a degree of transparency where you almost don't notice the translator. They just sort of disappear into the text. But what we see with Emily Wilson are some rather like jarring additions to the text that are designed to jar. One of them, the most famous one, the one that most people are familiar with, is the translation of polytropon as complicated. Polytropon, of course, does not mean complicated. It is variously translated as, I think Fagles translates it as the man of twists and turns. So of twists and turns would be the phrase. Greg Naj translates it as alternately much turning, like think of a snake turning back on itself, or very wily. And it can kind of mean both of those things. There's this, my own view of it is as someone who's like walking around an object, looking at it from many different angles to try to get a perspective of it. But so the translation of it as complicated is actually very clever, because the word complicated describes the word itself, but it not only doesn't capture the adjective that is describing Odysseus, it actually simplifies him. Using complicated to simplify the character. And more egregious, I think, in my opinion, is she adds "he failed" to her translation. He failed to save his men. What is actually in the Greek is something like, though he tried as hard as he could. There's this word that means to draw back to one's chest, but it's in the negative. So it was unable to draw them back to his chest. And then it goes on to say, the blind fools, nepioi, that their own recklessness destroyed them. They devoured the cattle of the sun, and the sun god wiped away the day of their return. That's Fagel's translation. But that's the spirit of it. And then we are treated to this long monologue by Zeus complaining about people who are blaming the gods and other peoples generally for their own tragic follies. So the idea of adding words that are not in the Greek to say Odysseus failed when the text very, very clearly puts the blame on the compatriots themselves, on his comrades. It's a very, very subtle addition, but her text is filled with these very, very subtle jabs at Odysseus and Telemachus, basically at every opportunity, tearing them down a peg or two in their intellect, in their morality, in their maturity, in their responsibility. But she's a very good writer, so it's very subtle, and the writing itself comes across very well. She's not even the worst translation. I think the worst is probably Alexander Pope, which is just, he was a young kid trying to translate Homer, and he used a very, very flowery European court language to do it, and it completely hid the brutal directness of the Greek that was in the Greek. You'll see a Greek passage where it's like, and then this soldier stabbed so-and-so through the face, and he screamed and fell down, and blood flew everywhere, and his brains came out the other side, and his eyes went dark, and his armor clattered about him. And then the Alexander Pope translation will be like, and through his helmet shot the spear brightly. And it's all this like very flowery court poetry that rhymes, but is not the same tone that you get in actually reading the text in the Greek.
Right. When did Pope publish his translation?
I believe it. I don't remember exactly. I want to say it was the 17th or 18th century, though.
Okay, that would be it. Yeah,
it was a while back. Yeah,
that would be it. Yeah, that would line up too, because even like some biblical translations, they tried removing the Song of Solomon, for example, because it was too risque. So I could see the gory details of the classics being
uncourtly.
Yes, being improper for a gentleman, let alone a lady to read. So
and attempts to make things, even the Rig Veda translation that most of us use in the order. It's translated, it's like a Victorian thing where it's an attempt to make it sound a little bit like the Bible.
Yeah. Try to have the cross-cultural similarities as opposed to the glaring differences. But why? It seems like that's a common theme when it comes to the heroic ideal, which we'll be diving into shortly, is when feminists get a hold of it, they the clever ones at least are very subtle about it, and maybe feminist is the wrong term.
It's any ideologue, really,
right? Any ideologue, typically leftist, but you see it in Hollywood now. Anytime they get a hold of any kind of heroic narrative, if they're clever, they'll find ways to subtly subvert it, to change small things.
Yeah.
A good example of a recent one that tried would be like the Rings of Power, right? The recent Amazon adaptation of Lord of the Rings, where they took the feminine ideal of Galadriel, that was brilliantly written by Tolkien, and subverted it to try to turn it into a weird heroic myth. But instead of having a hero's journey, she was always perfect from the beginning. So it was a clumsy way of doing it, but it seems like that's common. Even with Emily Wilson, she'll translate things reasonably well and have reasonably well written prose or poetry, but she'll change just enough to substantively change the work and subvert the heroic ideal.
Or in any case where there is ambiguity or subjectivity in the correct word, because when you're translating ancient poetry, it's essentially you're essentially facing an impossible task. You have the semantic meaning of the words and the language. You have the prose or the meter, and then you have the feeling tone of the text. Any translator with a basic grasp of the language can do one of those three things. If you're really, really talented, you can maybe pull off doing two of those simultaneously. Three of them is frankly impossible. You're not going to be able to capture the meter, the feeling tone, and the semantic meaning at the same time. Most people don't even try with the meter anymore.
Yeah.
But there are some words that there just isn't a good translation for. So what do you do when you come across a word like polytropon? Do you make hyphenated language words? Do you simplify it or oversimplify it to make it accessible? Do you just not translate it at all? I don't remember which one it was, but there's one translation of Homer that just every time it comes across a word like that, it'll say, sing to me, muse of the man polytropon, who wandered far and wide. They just don't translate it. Just keep it that way.
A footnote at the bottom.
Yeah, which is like fair. My ideal translation, I've reached the point where my favorite ideal translation would be a perfectly academically precise interlinear one that would allow me to like put together what the feeling must have been, because my Greek is not good at all by any stretch of the imagination. I can stumble through the pronunciation of most Greek words. I know, probably 50 Greek words,
Mm-hmm.
From various different epochs, because Attic Greek is not the same as Koan Greek, which is not the same as Mycenaean Greek, and none of those were Homeric Greek, which was a incomplete translation of Ionian Greek into Mycenaean Greek, or maybe it was the other way around. No one ever spoke it, so it's its own very idiosyncratic thing. Much like the King James Bible is very idiosyncratic English that no one ever spoke. But like this interestingly ties into this idea of cleos too, because if we're hoping to win imperishable fame by having stories written about us, but those stories can be either intentionally subverted for ideological reasons, or they can just be accidentally misconveyed, various ways. Does that change the prospects of immortality for the would-be hero in some way? And it creates a sort of a problem of language for the one who hopes to win imperishable glory. What is the nature of this glory if it relies upon an imperfect poet or imperfect translations of your poet? Maybe they weren't thinking across lands and languages.
Yeah, that you go into that quite a bit in your book, actually, don't you? Specifically, the scene where Odysseus meets Achilles in the underworld, and there's sort of a dialogue where Achilles questions the wisdom of his decision to gain eternal fame and die a hero, but then lose the opportunity to do what might have been the greater glory that Odysseus found in returning home.
There is, yes, there's a certain kind of young guy who gets very enamored with the Iliad, and that's usually a very great personality. But that
he slept with it under his pillow, allegedly.
Right. But there's something I think very unnerving to that kind of guy about this scene in the Odyssey, where Achilles says, more hateful to, or no, I'm thinking of the Iliad. He essentially says, I'd rather be a slave to a slave, a servant to a tenant farmer among the living than king of the dead. You can see the inspiration for Milton's Paradise Lost, the inversion spoken by Satan there. But right. There is an inversion of that, though, for some Homeric balance there, where Odysseus is lost at sea, and he says, oh man, I wish I had died on the battlefield, where at least I would have had fame, rather than dying unknown in the ocean. Because if you just die at sea, you just disappear. There's no fame, there's no glory or anything in that. So there is a little bit of the grass is always greener tension there. But it's
I was wondering that what that makes me think of is we're having a brief conversation earlier in the order about the gens, the Roman gens. I brought it up, or gens. I'm not sure how the proper Latin would have been pronounced. But it's essentially the Roman concept of the family above all, which for the time, the Bronze Age, when Roman society was first being formed, 7 to 500 BC roughly, arguably a little bit later when Numa was king and establishing the rules and traditions. But the idea, the foundation of Roman society was the family, the paterfamilias. And to such an extreme degree that the father, the paterfamilias, had complete control over the family, and each family had their own patron gods, right? Which in a polytheistic sense, if someone married into the family, they were required to take on the family gods. And in a way, that would be a form of ancestor worship, where you would have, like, this is well represented actually in the HBO's Rome TV show, which anyone who hasn't watched, I highly recommend, where Brutus is named for his ancestor, the ancient Brutus, who they almost worship, in a sense, right, for his deeds and what he did. And that makes me wonder, would a valid reading of the Odyssey be that true eternal fame is found in the fame that's passed down through your family? Right, being a successful, not only adventurer, hero, doing great things, but more importantly, passing that down through your family lineage, that is passed on through generations. That's a much more reliable narrator than, say, a poet, right, or Emily Wilson, for example. I would imagine
maybe, but so then gens equals generations.
Right.
Really.
Exactly.
Which, so words, yeah. Like, so cleos, like some people might not even know, like, the deeper meaning, Chris. So like, the phrase that inspired us having this talk is cleos aptitan, right? And that's found in the Iliad, book 9.
Yes, and Cleos Amtiton translates as imperishable glory, or as Greg Nosh translates it, because there's a horticultural sort of etymology it's drawing from, unwilting glory, like a plant that never dies.
Yeah, it's often called imperishable, also, or undying. Yeah. It's an interesting one because it is fully cognate with a phrase. Well, it's a formula. It's a formula, and it's fully cognate with a Vedic Sanskrit phrase in the Rig Veda that is attested 4 times, Shravah Akshitam, or the alternate version, Akshiti Shrabaha, and it's in 4 hymns in the Rig Veda. And the only place that this linguistic formula is attested is in Homer and the Rig Veda. Also Sappho and Theognis also. But it's really about the Iliad and the Rig Veda. It's not attested anywhere else. But when the formula, it was like 1853, I forgot the guy's name, one of the early philologists discovered this formula and then traced it back to a Proto-Indo-European root.
Which it would have to be if it was in both the Rig Veda and the Iliad.
And his coming across this, his discovering it, something that was already there, it completely started the entire Indo-European comparative linguistics.
Okay.
So it's kind of a really big deal.
Oh, I didn't know that was the phrase that kicked it off. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That feels so appropriate too, because it's one of these sort of features of, it feels like one of the features of Indo-European myth, because there's so much in the myth of the Iliad that is much older than the stories of the Iliad. Like the Trojan War is supposed to have happened around 1200 BC. But the Rig Veda, I don't know if it goes back further or not. I don't remember.
1500.
So it goes back much further. And we see mythic symbolic elements that we find in the Rig Veda in the Iliad as well. So it's drawings from some themes that are older than both, necessarily, unless you believe that these were independently arrived at, which is also possible, but they're sufficiently idiosyncratic that it's probably not. Probably goes back to Indo-European chariot culture on the steppe, where we're fighting in Ukraine now.
Yeah, and you figure, the theme itself is ever present throughout all the entire Indo-European sort of mythic world.
Yeah.
But somehow it's only attested in these 2 poetic traditions. Thinking about it, it's probably because of the importance of poetry in those 2 traditions and the importance of preservation of the poetry.
Right. Rishab Dev says ice. Anyone else listening, feel free to ask questions or leave comments too. We're happy to answer those. To go back to Juvor's question though about what is this sort of alternative immortality that you might achieve by Nostos? Is that similar or different than the cleos offered to the warriors that die on the battlefield? Because Odysseus doesn't die on the battlefield, although Tiresias says it's a sweet death that you seek when he's in the underworld. So I'll be honest. I've been studying Homer for quite some time. The precise mechanism of immortalization in Nostos is a little bit mysterious to me. I think the way it works is that, it's just what people find interesting in a story. We are attracted to stories of men dying on the battlefield, doing great feats of martial prowess. But maybe Homer or the poets who preceded him discovered that people also like stories of homecoming. Maybe they also like the hero's journey. So this alternative possibility of immortality that didn't require you to die presented itself, and Odysseus became the model for that. And where's Donovan? Y'all vote him out. We didn't vote him out. We killed him. Hopefully he won't be back, but you never know. So we'll see.
Yeah, he's off on his own underworld adventures at the moment.
What is as far as cleos, that word, what is the sort of root meaning?
I mean, it's glory or fame. I don't know the Proto-Indo-European root offhand.
Yeah, it's cleos.
Oh, okay.
Cleos. But the when you do the formulaic changes to get to Vedic Shravaha, it becomes, and the root is shru, which means to hear. So
Yeah.
it means fame, and it means fame and glory.
That
But
which is heard.
it also means to hear. So it's implying being heard about later. Imperishably for all time, to be heard about. Even in the post-Vedic scene, in Hinduism, to sit and listen to the guru or to hear the Ramayana being read or somebody reciting the Bhagavad Gita is called Shravana, which means to hear.
I don't want to get I don't want to go full like schizo mode. But there's probably a great conversation to be had, maybe with some development first, on the sensory origins of many of these things, because to hear is a form of knowledge. The traditional, or at least one of the traditional early word forms for knowledge in Greek is oida, which means I see. So to see something or to have seen it is to have knowledge of it. And hearing something is, by most people, and including ancient accounts, but also in modern accounts, considered sort of an inferior form of knowledge. We don't accept hearsay in courts, for example. Hearsay is more than just hearing something; it's hearing something that someone else said and so forth. But I think the danger is sort of latent there, and the way that the poet got around this is he would say, well, I heard it from the gods directly, the gods and the muses who see all, who know all. And the so-called like boring chapters, things like the Catalog of Ships, book 2 of the Iliad, were actually very important because it was sort of a demonstration of the seeming omniscience of the poet, which is not the poet's omniscience, but this ability to have, as Greg Knowledge would say, total recall, could only be explained by hearing these things from the gods. So that was how they sort of got around this problem of knowledge by hearing things.
I have to wonder though, because I mean, going back to Proto-Indo-European, the only way the knowledge would have been passed on would have been oral traditions, right? That's the only way stories would have been passed on. And if you go to like ancient Sparta, even well into the Peloponnesian Wars, according to Lycurgus, all knowledge was to be passed on orally. There was no writing.
Yeah, I mean, it's certain kinds of knowledge, right? So if I go and I see the Aurora Borealis, I have one kind of knowledge because I saw it. And then if I come back from Alaska and I tell you about it, I'm like, man, there's these things that you see in the sky up there. I tell you about it. You now have a different kind of knowledge. It's not the same kind of knowledge that I have because of the separation that my interpretation and retelling introduces to you. Now imagine I tell you about the Aurora Borealis that I saw, and then you tell Ed about the Aurora Borealis that I told you about. You get this sort of telephone game effect that can quickly corrupt knowledge. And this is one of the big themes, actually, of Adam Nicholson's wonderful book about different oral traditions, some of which he cites one example of an Irish bard or rhapsode who was reciting a poem that he had been inherited. Basically, his whole family was bards, and he recited it while academics listened to him. Unbeknownst to him, they had recovered a copy of this poem that had been transcribed like 600 years prior, and they compared it, and he got, over like a 12-hour reading, he got like 3 words wrong. There's just unbelievable levels of accuracy. Conversely, on the other side of Europe, another set of academics are listening to sort of Balkan rhapsodic accounts of World War One events, and after only 20 years, almost every single detail had been changed and made romanticized, and now there's a woman who's seducing this German general in order to get him to the spies who are going to take him, and nothing is accurate after only a few years.
The sea story effect. Yeah.
Right. So there's some variation here.
Yeah. So to answer Conan's question, we exclusively worship Crom. Now, on a serious note, though, that is a good question, and honestly, kind of a point of confusion for people who don't quite understand what it is exactly we do. If you read the Fire in the Dark, that's the best place to start to really get a deeper understanding of where we're coming from. We do draw on Greek sources. We also draw on the Eddas. We also draw on the Vedas from the Indian subcontinent. And we've even incorporated myths that fit the archetypes from Native Americans. We have conversations about those. We're entirely syncretic. So we look at philosophies from ancient cultures from around the world with the goal of pulling archetypes that we can move forward into the future with, right?
Yeah. And there's I hate to use the word because it's been abused into almost embarrassing levels of low tier abuse, but the word resonance comes to mind.
Yes.
We're not drawing on Greek sources because we are theologically obliged to do so because we are Greek or anything like that. It's no, we have an ideal, a sort of energy that we want to bring to existence, something that is creative and powerful and inventive and resourceful and positive. I mean, you can look at the project of solar idealism as a reaction to a reaction. It's everything not Christian feels dark and destructive and rebellious. It's why can't we be positive? Why can't we be creative in the face of the void? And so there are all of these excellent sources, all of these excellent artistic and philosophical resources that have been neglected, largely because of Christianity, that have already done some of this work. So why not find inspiration in these places? But it's not everything Greek is good because it's Greek, or everything Indic is good because it's Indic. It's just when you look back, there are these. You look at the descriptions of the Maruts in the Rig Veda, it's fuck yeah, it's very high test. You look at the what's going on in Homer or in Aeschylus for that matter, and you see many of the values that we aspire to embody already presented there and in some depth. It's well, we don't need to reinvent the wheel completely. We can build from, there's already an existing tradition here, so let's start from that and build from that. I hope that
each man is different and has his own wheelhouse, his own sort of proclivities and nature and the things that he's drawn to. The fire is at the center of it all. But we have our holy positives, which those are the holy positives are the sort of absolute,
right? The things that have been true for all men.
And so one guy's going to read the Iliad and just completely be drawn to it, and
some other guy's going to read the Eddas and be like Thor, and that's freaking awesome too.
And then there's some guys that aren't going to have any kind of anthropomorphic ideal in their mind at all. Yet those holy positives are still there, that list.
Mm-hmm.
So back to imperishable fame. So,
and just driving us back on
you
topic.
know, in the Iliad, when it comes to the hero, the glory, the imperishable glory, and being sung about later into people's ears, that comes with death.
Yes.
But then we have the Odyssey, where it is surviving it all and returning to love and light. But one thing that I've been thinking a lot about, especially today, is we've got this this formulaic phrase that is only attested in these two traditions, the Vedic tradition and in Homer and Homer related things. But in the Rig Veda, it is not death that is going to bring, because their eschatology, they're not so concerned with what's going to happen after death. They're concerned with now. And so, I'm not going to even get into like all of the verses in the four where it's mentioned, but the places where they're coming up, where this phrase is coming up, this imperishable fame, it's, one of them is an Indra hymn, and it's sort of that finding wide space, acquisition in the Machiavellian sense, like finding wide space, like you're going to bring the goods and everything's going to be great, and as a result you will have imperishable fame. And then in another instance, it is the poet singing about the patron of the poet, that he's going to give a bunch of stuff to the poet, and he'll certainly have imperishable fame as a result. And then there's another in Mandala 9, which is dedicated entirely to the Soma sacrifice, and the moment that it passes through the sheep wool filter to be mixed with milk. And you find that phrase there where Soma is on course to find imperishable fame. So it's all of these sort of positive things that are about the here and now and success in life, which is a really big contrast to Achilles.
The patronizing of the poet is a particularly funny one, because it's the inverse. There's a great quote that I actually included at the opening of The Hero and the Man. I'll read it real quick if you don't mind. It comes from a great philologist named Northrop Frye. And what he says is, quote, "It is hardly possible to overestimate the importance for Western literature of the Iliad's demonstration that the fall of an enemy no less than of a friend or leader is tragic and not comic. With the Iliad, once for all, an objective and disinterested element enters into the poet's vision of human life. Without this element, poetry is merely instrumental to various social aims, to propaganda, to amusement, to devotion, to instruction. With it, it acquires the authority that since the Iliad it has never lost, an authority based like the authority of science on the vision of nature as an impersonal order." That's from 1957. Now, I think there's, because when we look at the death of an enemy, we don't want to say, well, that's exactly the same as the death of a friend. But if we want our stories to convey themselves forward infinitely into the future, generationally and across, not just across time, but across cultures, then it has to have this kind of, almost objective feeling to it. And if you're just praising the patrons of yourself, that's not going to convey that. And if you only praise the great men of your own society, it doesn't come across as objective. One of the great things about the Iliad is it finds the virtue not just in Achilles, but also in Hector. Hector, the Iliad was so flattering of Hector, the enemy, that Hector became the model of European knighthood and chivalry. He was the first of the 9 worthies. All of European knighthood is based in many ways on him and his example. and it had criticisms of its own side. It had criticisms of Paris, the Trojan, but it also had criticisms of, Agamemnon and Thersites and a few others. So that tone of objectivity, sort of upon which this theory of immortalization, like, okay, we're gonna immortalize our best people by trying to make these stories sort of true to the spirit in some way, and not just flatter our own best people, flatter our own king. Conan in the comments brought up, the Eddas. There are some problems with the Eddas because many of those poems, especially the Snorri works, appear to be just flattery of one of the kings.
Mm-hmm.
There is a theory that a good friend of the order, Clinton Macmillan, has been pushing with some fairly strong evidence that, in fact, Thor and not Odin was the chief of the Aesir, and that got inverted for the benefit of a king who was supposed to be a bloodline descendant of Odin. Many of the kings were claimed to be. So we're going to make Odin the chief god instead of Thor, who's kind of more the people's god. And then there's a lot of propaganda in these myths. And so, what do we praise in our poetry, and how do we go about praising it, and how do we go about choosing the objects of our praise, become very interesting questions. And how does this change how the stories are received by the people?
Yeah,
as well.
Kind of leaning into that. Speaking from that same region or same culture, I should say, not Iceland, but the Sagas. There are a lot of sagas out there. They've found more. They're finding more every couple of years. They're unearthing them. And what's very interesting about sagas, in particular, probably the most famous, the saga of the Volsungs, the intent, for the most part, is to be able to tie back the kings of the time to the ancient hero Sigurd, and to who became Siegfried in Germany, and thus Wagner's Ring Cycle was all based on Siegfried. So very famous hero, but those stories were written primarily as a way of attesting to the godly lineage of I think it was a Norwegian king or a Danish king maybe. But what's especially interesting in that is written for the time period, talking about legends being passed throughout history. Attila the Hun is attested in the Saga of the Volsungs as an ancient king, King Atli, who is full of fame and glory, and it has conquered many lands, and is the greatest warriors. And I think Sigurd might even meet King Atli at one point in the story. And that's just a Norse translation of Attila the Hun. He was well accomplished enough that his story was passed down through an entirely different culture, passed generation to generation, so that he was woven into their own stories and their own propaganda, which is an interesting piece, an interesting note there. Kind of ties into both personal propaganda, ties into the idea of passing stories down through family, but it also ties into the cross-cultural connection.
Yeah, well, and it ties into the idea of, like, if we're going to be honoring, foreign kings and mentioning them, then we're being good historians, and we're being true. You should take
Right.
our word that our honoring of our king is also real and significant,
Right.
vis-a-vis Northern Fry's objectivity frame.
Right. It's also worth noting that objectivity wasn't necessarily a goal of a lot of ancient historians. For example, Plutarch in his Lives, his goal was never to be objective with the stories. His goal was always just to tell the stories, right? And that's how a lot of these ancient historians, pre-modern, really, everything pre-modern was very subjective and narrative, and a lot of it's semi-mythological.
Well, the whole idea of objectivity gets really tricky very quickly.
Exactly.
It's one of these words that, and this dovetails into the problem of language we were talking about before. How is it exactly that you immortalize these characters? When you immortalize the story of them, are you immortalizing them, or are you immortalizing something of your own creation that they were just the inspiration for? Objectivity is one of these words that just it invites not even ideological equivocation, like Mott and Bailey's or things like that, but accidental equivocation. It's very easy to accidentally slip from this idea of being disinterested into this idea of accounting for all information, sort of an almost omniscience, or from trying to see both sides to seeing all sides, which is itself not those two aren't exactly the same thing. And that's how you get things like, you know, Howard Zinn textbooks, and
Right.
we're gonna oh, you neglected this third party, we're gonna tell the entire history of this conflict from this forgotten people's perspective. Or, you know, if I'm you know, Madeline Miller or someone, I'm gonna write this from a woman's perspective. The ideal of objectivity has roots here and comes out in law a few hundred years later, in Athens in particular, in an attempt to end blood feuds and so forth. It's not just about immortalization, it also is dealing with the tragic problems that arose from competing subjective perspectives on, for example, who owned this property. You know, but objectivity, and this is like the classic history 101 problem with telling a historical account, is you can't actually achieve objectivity. Right. You have to select, you know, all right, how many bathroom visits am I going to include in my biography of Napoleon Bonaparte?
Right. Yeah.
If it's 0, then I'm choosing to exclude those. What's the standard that I'm using for what to include and exclude in my biography, in my account? And there is no objective standard there. It's not possible unless you include everything. So this gets used, and this is where the equivocation becomes really annoying, because this can get used to say, well, objectivity is impossible, so I'm going to use that as an excuse to write just a completely openly ideologically biased account in favor of my own personal group or whatever, as if that's equivalent of people who are doing their best to convey the true spirit of, you know, events as they happened, regardless of who benefits from that particular story.
Right.
And the trickiness of words does not end with objective, but it gives it's an important point to dwell on when thinking about the problem of the project of immortality through language.
Yeah, there's a really good modern example of storytelling and passing on the heroic ideal that actually, I was just given a book called The Boys of the Battleship North Carolina by a lady named Cindy Horrell Ramsey. It's about obviously the battleship North Carolina in World War II, which was commissioned, I believe, immediately after Pearl Harbor, and at the time was one of the largest battleships ever built. And in this story, obviously, everything that happens in World War II happened within the full light of history, so to speak, right? So we have the objective facts of everything that happened. But when you read that, you can read it in a textbook. You can find contemporary news articles and find out exactly what happened. But that's not the really compelling story, right? So what this author did, and I give her really, really good credit for doing it, and she outlines it at the very introduction to the book, is the goal is to not give a fact, you know, day by day description of exactly what happened, but to tell the stories of the individual sailors that were on the boat. And at the time she wrote it, I think it was like 2003, early 2000s. So a lot of these guys were still alive a lot of these junior guys that joined, at 16, 17, 18 to fight in the war. And it's just their personal accounts of what happened. And she even says that, we went back and we verified everything that we could, but the things that we couldn't verify, we still included, because even if we can't verify as fact what they say, it's still how it happened to them. Even if it is a sea story, it's real to them. And that's where the story is. That's where the myth is, where the myth becomes formed. And of course, these guys are telling these stories to their kids and their grandkids. And so these guys' stories have passed down, just like my own great-grandfather's stories from World War II have been passed down to us. So that's where I think that the real value is in storytelling when it comes to mythology and the heroic ideal. To passing on the stories of heroes is the objective truth of the story matters less than the meat in the meaning, right?
Right.
So
Well,
in a way, the issue of language,
or the other way around.
right?
The meaning matters more than the truth.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
Exactly.
it reminds me of another sailor, Odysseus, who has a bit of a mixed relationship with the objective truth.
Hey,
Right.
true.
He
Why
is
they-
always telling tall tales and spinning stories, and he is a man of many faces. And the stories that most people know of, and most closely associate with the Odyssey, the Cyclops,
Mhm.
Charybdis and Scylla, the Sirens, all this stuff. You don't actually see that in the Odyssey.
Right.
Many people are surprised to find when they read this, what they actually see is Odysseus on the island of the Phaeacians recounting these stories in the context of a story where, in every other instance of Odysseus speaking to someone, he spins up some tall tale first.
Yeah.
And he is a sort of unreliable, not a narrator, but an unreliable personal narrator of his own story. Within the context of the story, we assume that Homer is a reliable narrator. So Homer is like your historian. He is telling us what the sailor said, not necessarily what actually happened. But there's a kind of honesty to that.
Exactly.
This is what they said. Judge for yourself. And I think the reader of the Odyssey, any mature reader of the Odyssey, is quite comfortable being very skeptical of Odysseus's own self-account, but not loving him any less on that account.
It's how we got through it. It was part of
Yeah.
it was survival techniques.
Yes.
He made it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, he got and also that makes me think, like, conceptually, like, you have you have this undying glory through death, and then we already discussed undying glory through great deeds that allow life to flourish.
And valor that is objectively recounted.
Yeah. But is there, is that death on the battlefield? And of course, the Rig Veda has lots of battlefields happening as well. But the dying on the battlefield is usually tied to a greater story that is also about life eventually flourishing.
Right.
Once again, so it's also is the goal the same, or is there
Yeah.
a difference?
It is interesting because what you see, one of the things that Greg Nosh points out is that the hero, and again, highly recommend this book for people who are interested in these themes going a little deeper. But these heroes that die on the battlefield were viewed as sources of fertility for the city and so forth, and not just for the side they ostensibly belonged to. Curiously, if a great enemy died fighting you, his body might be a source of fertility and growth for your city, even if he was an enemy. It's the greatness and the heroic sort of stature that makes them this source of fertility. And we're saying fertility in a very broad sense here. But as Druvor was pointing out earlier, the man who returns home is also a source of fertility. I mean, one of the greatest modern retellings of the Odyssey is like the Lion King, right? So Simba comes back, and the rains come back, and the animals come back, and the trees come back, and everything is put back in its correct place. Order is restored, and life is able to thrive again, as opposed to in its state where it was being overrun by hyenas and or ill-tempered suitors, and everyone was like being eaten out of house and home, and things were not going so well. So like, just as there seemed to be a few different paths to cleos and theton, there might be a few different paths to the sort of fertility that the dead hero was associated with as well.
Conan has another good question, I think especially for you, Chris. So death on the field was seen as possibly a sacrifice to the gods or to nature?
Oh, that is really tricky. It depends on context. There are contexts, maybe the easiest and most obvious example would be the death of Patroclus in the Iliad. He is... So one of the things that knowledge describes about Patroclus is that he is a therapon, or a body double, which the word actually also conveys a ritual substitute for Achilles himself. So his role is as a kind of a sacrifice thematically in the story. And the way he dies on the battlefield is he's struck 3 times. There's a stunning blow that sort of knocks the armor off, and that comes from Apollo. Apollo strikes him and stuns him, and it basically it knocks off his helmet and his cuirass. And then he's hit in the neck. And that was, I think, also by Apollo. And then Hector delivers the final blow, the coup de grace. And the structure of that stunning blow from behind, and then the neck slit, and then the coup de grace, is exactly the way that animals were sacrificed. So there are some thematic crossovers, and the death of heroes, I think, was sort of thought of in terms of animal sacrifices, but people didn't go out with the intention to sacrifice themselves to some god exactly in that way. What they were going after was glory for themselves, and there might have been a sense that they were sacrificing their mortal life in the hopes of achieving immortal life, but that wasn't for the sake of other people necessarily. So yeah, it's complicated, and it varies, and there's an unfortunate and tragic degree of naivete in all of these cases, where they sort of don't understand the nature of the immortality that they're going to receive, if any, and they don't fully understand the cost. But things wouldn't work. The cities would not flourish. Life would not last. These civilizations would not hold without that sacrifice either. So they are kind of, in a way, almost like sacrificial animals, functionally. And we beautify them and we give glory to them in compensation for that sacrifice. The funeral games that we hold in honor of these dead people, these dead heroes, are a sort of expression of gratitude for their sacrifice. The Olympics are a long-standing funeral game for a hero. They're very similar to the Panathenaic games that were held explicitly in honor of Achilles.
Didn't know that was the origin of the Olympics. Interesting.
Yep. Funeral games that are compensation for the death.
Very cool. It definitely adds a very heroic layer to the people who dedicate their lives to athletic performance, trying to achieve their own heroic ideal.
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
Rishab Dev says, real honorable men of God fight against evil forces. Has been going on for thousands of years, but evil forces are becoming stronger. Well, yeah, I mean, fighting against evil is always, the calling of men, right?
Yeah, the
but it,
goal of the striker, right? That this here represents is going out and fighting the darkness.
Yeah, this introduces questions of like what is evil, and the objectivity question becomes a real doozy here, because is evil, if we're going to have our story be about, good versus evil in a sort of Tolkien sense, where one side is pure good and the other side is pure bad, or is our story like the Iliad, where we recognize that our adversary might not be evil in an objective sense. They just might be an adversary that we happen to be fighting. I think one of the most attractive things about samurai culture and about World War I fighter pilot culture was that there was a deep sense of respect for one's adversary. They didn't seem to think of each other as evil. A samurai fighting another samurai, they wanted their adversary to be excellent because that's where the honor was. There's no honor in like killing 100 orcs that die to like a single, hobbit thrown rock. There's honor in, fighting against like a serious, like a Hector. That's where there's honor. In fighting against a serious adversary. And what you had in samurai duels and in World War I fighter pilot combat was a deeply human way of fighting each other. When the Red Baron was finally shot down, he was shot down by like 3 different people simultaneously. No one knows who actually got him. They gave him like his enemies gave him a full funeral and a proper burial, and they were extremely respectful of him because they respected him. They respected what he was and they respected what he did. And I think I think the label of evil is itself a bit of an open doorway into becoming what you're claiming to fight against.
It can be. We did have a fantastic conversation a few years ago in the Nevada desert talking about trying to drill down on objective good and evil.
Yes.
That was a fantastic podcast. You can go back in the archives and find it. It's a really, really good conversation. And also just Jack did a fantastic job. It was very aesthetically shot. That was a really good conversation.
Beautiful place.
It was gorgeous. That was definitely one of the best events we've ever done.
I was just about to bring up Nietzsche's talk of the spider, the tarantula in Thus Speaks Zarathustra, and I remember there was a freaking tarantula out there with us in Nevada.
There was. We made friends with them. I
tried to sleep with me. Yeah,
a good photo of him. Yeah. I was surprised by how small tarantulas were. Honestly,
they come in various sizes.
Yeah, well, because I know some species, like Southeast Asian species, I think, are just like.
Yeah, you get those like Goliath bird eaters that are just like terrifyingly large and like borderline harmless.
Yeah, but the desert ones are like tiny. But yeah. And then is Rashad, your other comment about modern day Olympics being just for entertainment. I mean, you're not wrong, but that could be said for any athletic pursuit to a degree. For the spectator, right? For the spectator, it's about entertainment, but for the athlete, there is a sense of physical heroism and pursuing perfection in a given.
There's also personal glory and probably national glory because the countries you're representing are going to remember them.
Well, how can you have glory without observers?
Exactly.
There's a question there, And at least in Greece, the observers were not merely being entertained. They were entertained, and entertainment was probably necessary for there to be power behind this process. But it was participatory. The feats of the athletes were inspiring and reinforced the values of the society. We value these things, both the things the athletes are doing and accomplishing, and more importantly, the feats of the heroes in whose name we are doing these things. Every funeral game event, every Olympic competition was a veneration of the hero who inspired that as well, and a reinforcement of those values, even if those values were taken too far by the hero. It's like he tried too hard, but man, we love the spirit there. And there's something tragic there, but we're still going to reward and reinforce this is the kind of person that we value here in our society. And in some cases, this became outright participatory by the crowd, as in you would actually have like pageants where the funeral games would open with a theatrical reenactment of the events. And some of the games were like that. There was in the Panathenaic games, so not the Olympics, but the ones that were bigger in ancient times, there was what was called an apobatic chariot race. That was a race where the racers would start on a chariot, and then halfway around the track, or maybe a little further, they would leap off the moving chariot, hit the ground running, and finish the race on foot. This was something that was inspired by Achilles. It was the big game. It was the big event of the Panathenaic Games, and it was explicitly in honor of Achilles' athleticism in combat at Troy.
We got to bring events like that back to the Olympics. That is badass. Like
motorcycle jousting.
Seriously, or I mean, you could say like the ski shooting, right?
Biathlons,
yeah. The shooting biathlons. That I mean, you could say that's
wild,
comparably incredible feat. I mean, Finland is pretty much always going to dominate there, but yeah, that does tie nicely. We're going a little over an hour, and this is episode 0. It's a dry run, right? So in the future, we could plan to go for several hours if we have the time. But for now, this would be a good time to.
Ed's crying over there on the East Coast. Like, I don't know.
Hey, I'm on the East Coast too. All right, it's almost midnight for me here.
We're on the same time.
Yeah, but we can tie it back to present day, right? And how we can take these sort of ancient heroic ideals, whether it's the Iliad's idea of the fame imperishable, the Vedic, or even the Odyssey or Odyssean. Would that be a word? Sure. Ideal of heroism, and how can we tie that into modern life? Because a lot of our present day heroic stories, like I mentioned earlier, they do come from the greatest conflicts we've seen in the last several centuries, the world wars.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and more modern ones. I mean, there's some GWAT vets that have stories of heroism, but not everyone's going to go to war. Not everyone's going to fight, and hopefully our country won't be involved in any wars in the near future.
The GWAT people are really good ones to talk to about this, though, because I think vets have a deeper insight to an important question that many young guys forget to ask, which is it really desirable to be a hero in the first place? And many veterans who actually see what go into this are the first to say, you don't know what you're looking for. You don't understand the cost. You don't understand the vapidity of this kind of immortality. And there was a great poem, a terrible poem, but a great poem that came from World War I called Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, which describes in very grotesque prose language just the misery and then the horror of a gas attack. And one guy didn't quite get his mask on in time. And there's a sense of the pointlessness of it. And you see all this in the Iliad. This is one of the beautiful things about the Iliad is it is not shy about the cost, and in a sense the pointlessness of it all. Like, what are we even fighting for? Like Agamemnon's, we're fighting for Agamemnon's honor, really? Like, why? What's he to quote Achilles? What have the Trojans ever done to me? They've never taken my cattle over in Phthia. Are Agamemnon and Menelaus the only men who love their wives?
Yeah.
So there is a question here, and a very valid one, about, like, is heroism worth it? And it's something that people should really think about very closely, given the challenges facing the possibility of immortalization through poetry and song. But at the same time, we shouldn't go all the way in the other direction and say, heroism is poisonous, because our culture is made on stories of heroism.
Exactly.
So I think what we have in the Greek tradition, and probably the Indo-European tradition in general, is a very thoughtful and tender sense of tragic compassion and gratitude for the sacrifice of these heroes, and they should be compensated for their sacrifice. But part of that acknowledgement, I think, is like not just being a Diomedes that blindly does what you're told, but being an Achilles who has the wherewithal to say, to question what is worth fighting in the first place, and not becoming a drone in either sense, in some war that you don't actually understand.
It seems to me in the probably post World War II, the entire sentiment, at least amongst the people, it's been replaced by movie stars and musicians.
Yes.
People are more likely to, like, who are your heroes? Kurt Cobain.
He died.
Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
It's Hollywood stars and musicians that have taken the place of, like, the great sort of, like,
and the ones who die, especially. I mean, an amazing example in this
Club is like a group of deities.
Maybe the least tragic example, maybe the most positive example we can point to, is Ozzy Osbourne, right?
Yeah.
Who goes out 2 weeks before he dies. He goes out in a special chair, just strapped upright like Cuchulainn, right? For one last performance, no painkillers like William Wallace and Braveheart, because he's there to do his thing. That's the kind of glory we can aspire towards.
And I always thought of him in my head. I was always like, he's the bard. He was like the modern day bard, because he's telling these really rich, incredible stories that are kind of easy to lose unless you're listening closely to his whole entire catalog. But yeah, like, right. He went out with, like, a lot of glory, and the at least on X, I mean, the response from people really felt genuine.
Right. And that's a less tragic one than like Kurt Cobain or like Lane Staley.
Yeah, and I met him. He was.
Yeah.
It's just like, dude, you're creepy and gross.
Or like any of these other artists who just heroin themselves out of existence. It's just sad,
But it seems it's very rare that there's somebody that might be on the level of the type of glory that the men in these myths that we continue to return to for millennia. It's very rare that there is somebody in that category.
Well, right. It's worth asking, and I know we're going over on time here too, maybe not objectivity, but at least stepping out of our own shoes every once in a while. And every time we look up to someone who we're like, man, I wish I could be like them, it is worth doing the Odysseus trip to the underworld thought experiment question and asking them in our minds, would they want to be them, or would they rather be me? And it might be surprising how many people like look up to some extraordinary bodybuilder or some incredible musician and be like, man, I wish I had that talent. And if you ask them, most of them don't actually like their lives. Not all of them, of course, but what life is desirable is the question, I think, at the heart of this. And that takes us into other books, perhaps. Right. But Imperishable Glory is one answer on offer, but not the only answer to the question, what makes a good life?
Right. And I think that's what I wanted to wrap it around to before we close, because barring a situation, God forbid, where we all are called to duty to serve and to have a chance at that fame imperishable, barring that, I think it's reasonable to say that the best life to live in more of the man side rather than the hero side is to just excel at whatever it is that you are best predisposed to doing. Going back to one of Rashad's comments, whether that's being a scientist, physicist, innovator, I don't think anybody could argue that Elon Musk, even with all his faults, right, he's still achieving incredible things, and his name will live on for a long time.
Yeah,
and maybe,
well, even if you are forgotten in 2 or 3 generations, that doesn't inherently mean you lived a bad life.
Right. And then even for in the simplest sense, just being a good father, right? Passing your values on to your kids, or if you don't have kids, being a good uncle, being a good, even if you have no immediate family, if you're contributing to your community and adding to society in a way that'll live on past you,
then
right?
You get to be, gracious and count your lucky stars and enjoy life. But if circumstances arise that force the matter and say, well, I guess I'm going to die a hero now, there are worse ways to go.
Yep. In that case, I think as men, we should accept that bravely, right? Accept that calling and accept that that's our fate, so to speak. And fate would be a good conversation for another show. But
I just want the future men of the Order of Fire to know my name.
Exactly.
That's it. Yeah, I'll be happy.
Exactly.
In whatever this afterlife.
All right, guys. I think that's a really good spot to wrap it up. Thanks for hopping on, and hopefully we can we will make this a regular thing. We'll meet again next week at the same time, 10:30 Eastern Standard Time, and everyone in the chat, hope to see you there as well, and hopefully there will be many more people as we get this rolling. So
fantastic.
All right, stay solar, everyone.
Stay solar.
Stay solar.
Thank you for watching or listening to the Journal of Solar Culture. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and leave us a comment. The first volume of our journal is available in paperback and now, finally, on Kindle. Pick it up in our store or on Amazon.